Hello, this is DC Hammer, and this is the DC Hammer Show. So today I'm going to concentrate on a variety of articles from a single source, and that's the Epoch Times. They do an outstanding job of bringing issues together from around the globe. They seem to concentrate a lot on what's going on with the Red Dragon, the Communist Chinese. And this article that we begin with here brings to our attention what is going on in Communist China as the Red Dragon is using a ploy in order to establish a global DNA database. So not only is the Red Dragon using intellectual property theft, unfair trade policies, debt entrapment for its neighbors, the One Belt, One Road initiative to spread its toxic combination of communism and influence peddling, corruption, and elite capture around the world, it is also using its magic weapons. So unlike as when Barack Hussein Obama passed his magic wand on to President Trump, or at least locked it in the safe because he wasn't able to use it during his own administration, and President Trump pulled out that magic wand and used it in order to bring jobs back to the United States by taking action against the Communist Chinese and other international players that were attempting through the weak former administration to bring us down and to elevate themselves. The Communist Party under leader Xi Jinping, Emperor for Life, is using three magic weapons. The first magic weapon is the People's Liberation Army. So if you go back in time into the late 40s when Mao Zedong consolidated his power in China right after the fall of the Japanese at the end of World War II and pushed out the nationalists and created his communist regime in China. One of his first weapons was his people, and all he had to do was take all of these millions and millions of Chinese men and women and put them into baggy uniforms and use them to show the power that he could exhibit through his little red book and through the bullets that would make you bleed red. Over time, that has morphed to an army that is pretty on the parade ground, and the vast numbers of members of the Chinese military continues to grow as their population grows, and they have cloned the techniques of the British SAS and the American Special Forces units to create their own special Red Dragon fighting forces. And as women in the military continues to be an issue in the United States, women in the military is not an issue in China, as the Communist Chinese, the Red Dragon, is willing to use any of its assets, male or female, in order to get its way by projecting communism around the globe. The second magic weapon in the quiver of the Red Dragon is propaganda. And if you go back in time again to when the Communist Chinese were first consolidating their control, late 40s, early 50s, you see the communist version of ballet outfits. It's babes in bullets. But the Red Dragon's propaganda arm took on a whole new flavor starting back in the 1970s with people like then Mayor of San Francisco Dianne Feinstein, now Senator Dianne Feinstein, Dinosaur Dianne Feinstein, and if you look back into her past 40 years worth of her ties to Communist China, and just this spy that she had as her quote-unquote driver and also worked on her in her office as office staff, you know that it goes way deeper than just that office spy, and she's been a pawn, a tool of the Red Dragon for decades. And the third magic weapon in the Communist Chinese quiver is its united front tactics, as we've discussed in previous episodes. So when the communists took over in China at the end of the 40s in 1949 and consolidated their power by bringing together all of the different factions within China and creating then the single movement operated by Mao Zedong, they operated within the United Front model that had been created by the Bolsheviks back after the Russian Revolution in 1917, and what the Russians had done to consolidate their power into their communist takeover. The Chinese took that initiative and have put a whole new spin on it. The spin being to the point today, as brought to us by thechinastory.org, the expansion of the United Front has accelerated greatly under Emperor for Life Xi Jinping. Xi is dedicated to going back to the roots of the United Front efforts, reestablishing the rule that was put into place back in the 40s by Mao Zedong, and using then those three secret weapons, the armed forces with propaganda and the United Front, and is using these techniques in order to spread communism, and that would be China's flavor of communism, the Red Dragon's flavor, across the globe, and they have been extremely successful as they have continued to capture elites like people like Dinosaur Dianne Feinstein, Bill and Hillary Clinton during the Clinton administration. Chinagate scandal was splashed over the news back then. You have people like Johnny Wong and others that lured the Clintons into sharing, I believe, words like that are being used now instead of things such as espionage and treason. We're talking about exposing and sharing things. But back then it was just straight up espionage and theft of our intellectual and military technology. Also from the Epoch Times, we have an article that's talking about the fact that President Trump has, through his negotiating team on trade, Robert Lighthizer and Peter Navarro, made significant progress in trying to level the playing field on trade and to avoid having to implement additional tariffs against China. And it appears that there may be a deal brewing, and if it continues in that direction, President Trump has invited Xi to meet with him in Mar-a-Lago in order to sign the final documents once they get to a point that they realize that they've got common ground in order to execute an actual trade deal. Again, also from the Epoch Times, we shouldn't forget about Russia as Vladimir Putin continues to defend himself, this is his mind, defend himself against aggression from the United States and retaliate against the United States for having pulled out of that 1987 missile treaty that the Russians were violating on a daily basis, had no intention of abiding by any of the terms, but were ensuring that the United States was abiding by all the limitations that was indicated in that quote-unquote agreement. So it's another one of those undeal deals. Until now, it's always been the party other than the United States has benefited, and only the United States has either been punished or restricted by whatever agreement or understanding was reached. And Russia is now listing U.S. military facilities that would be targeted in case of a nuclear strike. Now, this should not completely freak you out, because the United States military, in its preparedness strategies, has always done the same thing. But it is obvious that Vladimir Putin, as the Trump-Russia collusion narrative has dissipated back into the dust from whence it was formed, since there was no there to begin with, Vladimir Putin is upping the ante by ensuring that maybe his loss of advantage over the United States, as President Trump has been very limited in what he could do with Russia over the last 2 years due to this false narrative that was created by Hillary Clinton and her cohorts. Now that Trump is breaking out of that box and may be able to actually engage with Russia in a way that would be in our best interests, Putin is hedging his bets to make sure that he's got the upper hand, or at least he will hope to try to do that by doing things like accelerating his missile and rocket programs. And once again, since this is kind of the Epoch Times on display, this article comes to us and highlights how a Texas sheriff is saying that the Mexican cartels are at the heart of the border crisis. Now, I was intending to do an expose and a deep dive into the deep state and go back in time and show and connect the dots and elaborate on how the Mexican cartels have captured elites themselves, just like the Red Dragon does. And the captured elites in this country are primarily members of the Democrat Party. For example, Janet Napolitano, when she was governor of Arizona and had an attorney general, a Democrat by the name of Dennis Burke in the DOJ, they were working vigorously not only on things such as supplying the Mexican cartels with weapons through Fast and Furious, participating in that, but also establishing close relationships with the Mexican cartels. Carlos Salinas, former president of Mexico, who is running a cartel down in Mexico now, and has his son running it as well, that Janet Napolitano and Dennis Burke formed close relationships with people within that cartel, and Dennis Burke ended up being disgraced and had to leave the Department of Justice. Janet Napolitano got out of town before President Trump took over, and took over the UC Chancellor position, the University of California Chancellor position. But the truth will come out, light will shine on darkness, and these rats can run, but they can't hide. So Sheriff Andy Louderback of Jackson County, Texas, not only says that the Mexican cartels are a danger to us, but he believes they are actually at the heart of the border crisis itself. That porous border on the south, until the wall, which is currently being built, not finished, but Donald Trump has now expertly moved the chess players on the board to enable him to have all the funding he will need, regardless of what happens with the Democrats, attempting to try to keep the border open and fight what President Trump is doing by filing court actions against some of the initiatives that President Trump is taking. It doesn't matter. He has more than enough. He's got up to $8 billion in his pocket now through a variety of funding sources, including the DoD budget, the ability to use the Army Corps of Engineers if he has to, and the ability, even though there was false reporting that there was going to be stretches of the wall that would not be able to go up because mayors and governors in certain states could have veto power over the building of the wall. That is not true. If they're interested in participating in the project, they have a consulting role to the federal government as these projects unfold. They don't have a veto. They merely may have to be consulted before actual stretches of the border wall are continuing to be built. So Sheriff Louderback goes on to explain that how the weak borders are enabling these cartels to exploit these areas. They're not only profiting off of the drug trade, but also the gun walking, gun trafficking, and human trafficking. The DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, has labeled these cartels transnational criminal organizations. That is actually a better moniker for them rather than cartels, as they have business models and they have added to their portfolio now dealings, as I said, that began with drugs, migrated to weapons, now includes human trafficking, and that would be both for the purpose of prostitution and for the abuse of children. And as the opioids continue to flow into this country, unfortunate scenes like this do take place with people overdosing when they are able to buy drugs on the street that have been provided to them as a conduit by open borders. 90% of the heroin that comes in the United States come from Mexico. The production is increasing dramatically year over year, 2016 and 2017, a 37% increase. Seizures are increasing for methamphetamines and other drugs. Tens of thousands of pounds of narcotics being confiscated. And it's not just the border states. As soon as those drugs come across the border, they typically head to the more well-off areas of the country, the urban areas like Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and Detroit, where they have already in place a wide distribution network, and the street sale of those narcotics is dramatically more than in some of the southern and rural areas. So bottom line is, finish the wall, crime will fall. And now that President Trump has got the wall squared away, he's off to make deals happen in other parts of the world. He is now in Vietnam. He is going to meet for a second time with Kim Jong-un from North Korea. And they are preparing now to take more substantive steps in order to ensure the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and ensure that as Kim considers his future and how it might be much more prosperous under the American model rather than the communist model, it appears that President Trump is, in my opinion, becoming the mentor for Kim Jong-un and showing him exactly how transition from his current closed society into an open society where he can actually enable his people to prosper while retaining control. It appears that the choice of Vietnam was strategic in that Vietnam itself over the last 50 years has gone from a country torn in half by war to a country now consolidated and even though run by the communists, has itself taken on more of a capitalist model in order to lift up its people through success in the markets by making and selling its own goods. So yes, the overriding goal of the summit is to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time, there are other actions that President Trump is taking, including meeting with the representatives of Vietnam, perhaps in order to impress upon them the importance for them to follow in the footsteps of President Trump for the leveling of playing fields when it comes to trade, ensure that the communist Chinese maybe are treating their communist buddies in Vietnam fairly, who knows. But since Vietnam has emerged from its isolation, and in the last 20 years has gone on a building spree of its own in order to improve its own infrastructure and to elevate its people, again, the primary purpose of this meeting is for President Trump and Kim to work out a strategy for moving forward into the future. So they do have an agenda that is set that will enable President Trump to form a closer relationship with the government representatives of Vietnam, and at the same time continuing then to put pressure on the North Koreans and to influence the Red Dragon, Communist China, in order to move forward with North Korea in a way that not only ends up with the denuclearization of that area of the world, but also the reunification of the two Koreas and establishment of a more solid relationship between North Korea and the United States to pull them away from their connection to the Communist Chinese. And finally, one last piece again from the Epoch Times. The Senate of the United States has moved to confirm a Trump nominee for a crucial Ninth Circuit seat. So Eric D. Miller was nominated for Ninth Circuit. That is the most liberal and most overturned court in the country. And President Trump has upped the ante with ensuring that new blood is added on to that dying beast, that leftist arm of the legal system that in the past has ensured that everything contrary to the Constitution and the laws of the land are attempted to be put into place. But as President Trump has had great success in overturning the verdicts that come out, the findings that are made by that court, by the Ninth Circuit Court, he is now putting into place representatives on that, not only that court, the Ninth, but other courts, and they're going away from the previous blue slip policy. In the past, a serious consideration for judges to be put in these positions was a recommendation by the home state itself. And so a senator in a state would provide, in essence, an initial thumbs up or thumbs down on a candidate by this quote-unquote blue slip policy. But as it's obvious that the blue slips would only now, as the Democrat Party has gone off the side of the cliff down to the abyss of leftism, has now turned into a complete and total political operation as far as trying to influence makeup of courts at all levels. In other words, if you're a leftist, you're going to get the senator's approval from the state in which that court exists and that jurist would preside. But if you're not a leftist, you are not going to get approval. You're not going to get a recommendation. So Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, has gone away from the blue slip policy, and we are now going to straight up, thumbs down, the votes on whether you're competent or not and do the job, and that's exactly the way it should be. So Miller was a clerk for Justice Clarence Thomas. He is a solid constitutionalist, and the Senate voted on Monday afternoon in order to move him along. They voted 51-46 on a straight party vote to move him along, and he will become a part of the Ninth Circuit Court, and that will start, I believe, with additional appointments to rebalance that court. And it may never end up being equally balanced left-right, but at least at this point it's not going to continue going further left. And that doesn't mean that President Trump is just going to try to put anybody that agrees with his positions on the courts. He is making sure that these people that he is recommending for these seats, these judgeships, to be extremely well-qualified people, including Miller, who received the ABA's highest rating of well-qualified before he was nominated for this position. And now that President Trump is succeeding with this nomination, he has 3 other nominations pending for the Ninth Circuit Court, and those now will be pushed forward. They will all be done without blue slip approvals, because they'll never get the approvals from Dinosaur Dianne Feinstein and Kamala Harris. That's not going to happen. But Senator Lindsey Graham, who's the current Judiciary Committee chairman, rejected the objections of Feinstein and Harris, who was criticizing these nominations, and said that he's very supportive of the nominees submitted by President Trump to serve on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and that they are all highly qualified candidates, and he, that being Lindsey Graham, is hopeful they will receive wide bipartisan support. So, we continue to win. President Trump continues to win, and so thank you for watching, and God bless. And now the DC Hammer Show is available as an audio podcast. Just go to Podcast Garden or iTunes and search for DC Hammer or News Network Analysis Associates, NNAA.